Alright, in this video I am going to start talking about the very influential book by the philosopher Immanuel Kant. And Kant is sort of a turning point in philosophy. I guess you could say that there is sort of a pre a pre-Kantian era of philosophy and a post-Kantian, in that before Kant, that philosophy was sort of going in a certain direction. Well, actually, it was going in numerous different directions, which is sort of the thing Kant did, was take all these different directions where philosophy was at and sort of brought it all together into one thing. And I mean, it's since sort of split off, but all of the different types of philosophy still have to contend with the things that Kant was talking about in the late 18th century. So in the late 1700s. I believe he died in 1804, if I'm not mistaken. Forget when he was born, but uh, in this video I'm going to be talking about his most famous work, which is the critique of pure reason. And this is sort of his magnum opus. This is the book of his that did this, that all philosophy since Kant has sort of had to grapple with, whether they are agreeing agreeing with it or disagreeing. But either way, they have to sort of take the ideas that Kant, particularly in the critique of pure reason, brought up. And before Kant, there were essentially two ways of thinking about what we would now call uh, epistemology. Epistemology. Uh, it wasn't called that yet in Kant's time, but this is what we would know it as today. And there were the rationalists, which I think were also sometimes called the noologists, noologist, and also the empiricists. And this is essentially the two ideas that were uh, at loggerheads with each other around the time that Kant was active in the late 1700s. And the rationalists were people who thought that knowledge could come from human reason, from reason, that that you could produce knowledge just through things like reason and introspection. And these are ideas that were popularized by people like Descartes. And it's the idea that metaphysics. So from this, you could do metaphysics. So metaphysics are sort of by definition the school of philosophy that goes beyond physics. That's what meta means, is that it's above physics. And so this is stuff that you couldn't go out and look for it. You couldn't go out and look in the world and test metaphysics. And so metaphysics is a school of philosophy that basically uses reason and the human mind to sort of come up with possible, or I guess necessary. We'll get a little into uh, modal logic in a little bit, uh, and so it's sort of, you essentially just sort of sit there and think about it and come up with the way that reality exists, and that's what people like Descartes, for instance, did uh, when in his meditations he sort of uh, proved that that reality outside of his own mind existed. Uh, so Descartes is famous for the cogito ergo sum, which I think, therefore I am, and it's the idea that the only thing you can know with certainty is that you, as a consciousness, exists. You don't know anything about the outside world. You can't prove anything about the outside world, but through Descartes' methodological doubt and a few other things, for instance, his ontological argument and so forth. He he just through thinking sort of proved to himself that that things exist. And so that's the idea of the rationalist, is that you can come up with a metaphysics. You can come up with a metaphysics about the thing, about the way that existence is, just using your mind. The empiricists, on the other hand, said that say that you can only know things from experience. And famous empiricists were people like John John Locke. Let's go Locke, uh, George Berkeley. I think that's how you spell his name, and David Hume. All of them from the British Isles, so they're often called the British empiricists. And the idea of the empiricists was that only through experience, only through senses, through your senses, can you come to know anything. And they, as you go down this list here, which is in chronological order of when they were active, they sort of become more and more uh, in the camp of all you can know are your senses. So John Locke maybe left a little bit of room for the rationalism. Uh, Berkeley a little bit less so, but he thought because of God, that God would not fool us with anything, and so we can be sure that the outside world exists. Where David Hume essentially said that all we can know are our senses. We don't actually really know anything about the outside world outside of our senses. And so he famously said that cause and effect is something uh, that we don't know that if we see an effect that its cause was necessary. We don't know that there is any sort of necessary connection between a cause and its effect. All we know is from habit, or from maybe habit's not the right word. We know just from constantly experiencing that when we have A, we always have a B that follows, and we can't even say always. We just know from experience that this has been the case every time. And so all we can say for sure is that B seems to follow A. We don't know if there what kind of mechanism there is between A as a cause and B as an effect. We don't know anything about this, uh, about the causal mechanism between the two. We don't know what there is inside of A that makes it be a cause of B. We can't just study A and say, okay, just by looking at A, I know that it's necessary that A must cause B, and vice versa. We can't look at B. We can't just single B out and look at it and say, well, it must be the case that for B to occur or to exist or to do something. I'm being very general here. Uh, we don't know just from looking at B that A is a necessary antecedent to that, a necessary cause, and so Hume, who is an empiricist, could he almost be seen as sort of uh, a skeptic, uh, and so and so if we follow Hume, we don't know, and he's skeptical about a lot of things, but cause and effect is probably his most famous thing. Um, and so what Kant did was sort of look at these two schools. So I'll just do R for rationality and E for empiricism, and sort of combined them. This is a very loose interpretation of what he did. There's a lot more to it, and we'll go into that. But you could say that he sort of combined these two into maybe what you would call his transcendental philosophy. So you'll see with Kant, transcendental is a word that's used a lot. His transcendental aesthetic and transcendental deductions and transcendental this, transcendental that. Um, and like I said, we'll get into this in future videos. Um, and so essentially what Kant was looking at was he broke down rationality and empiricism into uh, two two categories of two, I'll say. And so there's the a priori, oops, a priori, and the a posteriori, and also the analytic and the synthetic. And I've drawn it this way because I'm going to make a table. And so we can break this down and sort of group these together into four things. So there is the a priori analytic, which is sort of uh, where rationality would usually lie. So I'll put a little R here. In the a posteriori synthetic, which is where empiricism would lie. And understanding these concepts is sort of key for understanding Kant. And so I'll kind of go through these a little bit. So a priori, so Kant, the a priori analytic, which is something that, like I said, is still very active in modern day philosophy, is this idea of what is analytic and what is a priori, and does analytic a priori tell us anything useful and all that kind of stuff. But Kant sort of defined a priori analytic in three. I'm not going to say mutually inclusive because there's a lot of controversy about how much these three sorts of definitions actually overlap and how mutually compatible they are. But there is the containment definition, and I'll go through these in a little bit. There's the identity definition, and there is the clarifying definition. And essentially, what this means is, and is that the containment means that in a proposition, which a proposition, I guess I'll proposition, I will define that here. So a proposition is essentially something that's saying subject is concept. And so this is sort of the structure of a proposition. You have a subject and a concept, and you are assigning that subject to a concept. This goes a little bit beyond Kant's time, but Gottlob Frege, and this is kind of the way that I always try to remember it by. If you know math, Gottlob Frege, the late 19th, early 20th century philosopher, who's instrumental in modern logic, said, or sort of conceptualized a proposition as almost sort of a mathematical function. So in a mathematical function, you have f of x, and maybe that is x squared plus 3. And so this here is the function, and x is the input. So we have an x here. And so Frege sort of conceptualized a proposition as being sort of like proposition is proposition with x like that. And this is saying that x is p. So p is the concept. P is the thing that you are predicating of x, and x is the subject. And so you can actually take this, and this is sort of Frege's sort of insight, his contribution to this is this idea that you can take your predicate and leave the x sort of as a variable, and then you can say that then you can sort of take x and say, well, x could be some object A, some particular object A, could be some particular object B, and some particular object C. And what you're doing is you are predicating P of all these objects. And so X, this gets into quantificational logic that's more modern. This wasn't true, this wasn't known in Kant's time. And so you can you can say for all X, there is an X such that X is P. And so you can sort of quantify over all of these objects, or you can quantify over just some of them, and that's known as the existential quantifier. So if you see the backwards E, there exists some X such that X is P, and the universal quantifier is often written as an upside down A. So for all X, X is P. But anyway, this is just sort of my way of remembering sort of the structure of a proposition, is that it's this function, the way that Gottlob Frege conceptualized. And so we can take our proposition and predicate it, or our predicate and predicate it of multiple x's. And so this is you are predicating p on X, and therefore X falls under the concept P, and this is where the once again the more modern day ideas of things like extensionality, and intentionality come from. And what that is the extensionality are all of the things that fall under P. So anything that you could put in for X where this is true, if this is true, then that object is an extension of P. And so, uh, and so, yeah, everything. So if we have A and B and C, and it's true that all of these fall under P, then these are the extension of P. And the intention of P is essentially what P means. Uh, and so, uh, so the meaning of P is the intention. And so, uh, I'm trying to think of a good example offhand. And so, if we say that that P, the predicate, is is uh, is bachelor, then we could say that what falls under bachelor. So there's some guy A who is a bachelor, falls under bachelor. Some guy B is a bachelor, falls under bachelor. Well, what does bachelor mean? What is the intention of bachelor? And so that would be unmarried man. And so that is the intention. So what is a bachelor? A bachelor is an unmarried man. That's the meaning, the intention of bachelor. The extension are all of the people who fall under bachelor. Uh, and so anyway, this gets us back to where we were talking about with Kant, and when we're talking about a priori analytic, his containment definition is the idea that if we have an object and we are predicating P of it, then the the uh, the X is contained within P, and so if we go back to bachelors are just being the plural version of is, are uh, unmarried men, then this idea, these unmarried, the idea of an unmarried man is contained in the concept of bachelors, and so this concept is contained within this. And so what that means is, so that's why it's called analytic, because we're essentially just breaking down uh, bachelor into its different concepts. We're analyzing it, and so that's containment. And a priori, which is more of an epistemological idea. And so a priori just means that it's something that can be known without experience. So without experience is a priori, and Kant even allows that, something like bachelor and unmarried man alone are things that you could find out about from experience. You aren't just born with the idea of bachelors in your head. But once you find out that that there is such a thing as bachelors and that there is such a thing as married men, or unmarried men rather, then you can you can combine those things together, and you can even combine particular people. If there's some man A, and we say that A is a bachelor, then without having to know anything else, you don't need any new information. You can also say, well, that means A is an unmarried man. Uh, these concepts are sort of contained in each other, as I said. So knowing that A is one of them, you know that A is also the other one. Uh, so identity is the other idea, and this one. Um, so this one is sort of famous in more modern times too because of I'm going to scroll down here just a little bit for now. So identity. So this is talking about analyticity, and analyticity is often, and so we're still talking about this analytic here. Analyticity is often defined as what's called synonymity, which is pretty much the same as identity. And what that means is if we say that A is a bachelor, then we could just replace bachelor with unmarried man, and then we would just say A is, we'd probably change this to but an unmarried man. And the sentences would be identical to each other. That's what it means by identity. And so synonymity, we're saying that bachelor and unmarried man are synonyms of each other. And then in the early 1950s, W.V.O. Quine famously called out the idea that this isn't a good definition for analyticity, because then how do you define synonymity or identity? Well, you would define it as things that are analytic, and so you end up with circular arguments here. Uh, and this has been grist for a lot of philosophy since Quine's paper, which I think is called The Two Dogmas of Empiricism. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it came out in 1951. And so there's been a lot of talk since then about analyticity and synonymity, and can we rescue this idea of analyticity, and does it mean anything, and is Quine being too much of a stickler, and all this kind of stuff, because when you think about analyticity, it's sort of one of those things where it's like, I don't know if I can define it this way, but I know analyticity when I see it. So yeah, there's been a lot of a lot of philosophy going around with that since 51, but that post dates Kant's idea here. But that's the idea of identity, and then I think I misspelled this. This should be an L. Clarification, and this is sort of the idea that um, a lot of 20th century philosophers have grabbed onto. So people like Wittgenstein and Carnap and people like that, is this idea that an analytic statement is nothing but a tautology. And so people like Wittgenstein have said an analytic statement uh, doesn't do anything except sort of define what we mean by something. So when we say that that bachelors, and I'll just keep it short. So bachelors are unmarried men. Uh, this isn't some sort of new information. This is literally just the way that we define bachelor. And so uh, so this idea of clarification uh, is is maybe clarification is maybe taken even a step further by people like Wittgenstein and Carnap, and saying that this isn't even clarification. This is just in language us saying us agreeing that this is how we will define this. We'll define bachelor as an unmarried man. Uh, and so once again, this is getting ahead of ourselves as far as Kant goes. But those are the three ways that Kant uh, has sort of defined a priori analytic statements. Um, what Kant says is more important really is synthetic a posteriori, uh, which are things like which are the things we learn from empirical from experience, and so a posteriori. It's kind of a weird word to say, but anyway, this once again is if we go down here, I said without experience is a priori. So with experience is posteriori, and so that's this is an epistemological thing right here. So this is epistemological, which just means that it's sort of the source of knowledge. It's where the actual knowledge comes from, and so things like a priori and a posteriori are modifying things, knowledge statements. So you can have a priori, uh, knowledge, and a posteriori. Uh, I'll just put no there. So knowledge, and so these here are more talking about uh, essentially what kind of information is being obtained. This is how the information is obtained. This is sort of the content of the information. So maybe we can put content here. So analytic, the content is essentially just saying that the content is that something is predicated of another, and so it's just analyzing a proposition into its subject and predicate, and so that's the content of the information we get from there. And a priori is saying that we don't need to that if we know that A is a bachelor, then without finding out anything else about A, we can deduce essentially that A is also an unmarried man. And so a posteriori, how it happens is from experience, and synthetic means that there is new info. There's new information that's being obtained. Uh, that you are adding information. So here, saying that A is a bachelor means that A is an unmarried man. We're not adding any new information really. We're not going above and beyond these concepts here. But but if something is synthetic, then we are obtaining new information. And so uh, and so Kant gives the example of something like an object's weight. So something we can know a priori is that if we have an object here, object A, we know a priori that it takes up space because that's the definition of an object. An object is extended, I believe is the term he uses, which just means uh, takes up space. And we'll get into uh, in a later video what Kant means by space, uh, because he has a very nuanced and interesting and controversial definition of space. And that actually has to do with the fact that space is a priori. Uh, and so we know that this object A takes up space just by knowing that it's an object. We don't even have to see that. We don't have to experience A to know that if A is an object, then A takes up space. However, we don't know anything about the weight of A. We don't know if this is 1 kilogram. We don't know if it's 5 kilograms. We don't know if it's 100 kilograms. And so to obtain that information, you actually have to weigh it, or at least go try to pick it up and guess. But it's something that has to be experienced, and that's adding new information. The weight or mass of this object was something completely unknown. So this was unknown until we went and experienced it. And so when we experienced it in some way, either reading the scale that told us how much it was, or lifting it up and sort of feeling for ourselves, at least approximately how much it weighed, it was through experience that then we gained this information. We couldn't guess, we couldn't, just by knowing that A is an object, there is no way we could say that A equals X kilograms just by knowing that it's an object. And so this is not something we can know a priori. It's something we know a posteriori, and it's new information. This is new info about this object A, and so that's what this idea of synthetic a posteriori is talking about. And so one of Kant's things, one of the main ideas in the Critique of Pure Reason is this idea of, do synthetic a priori things exist? So a posteriori analytic is sort of ignored. It's not really a coherent concept. It's not very coherent. But Kant is interested in this a priori, this synthetic a priori here, and so that's a lot of what the Critique of Pure Reason is about. Is figuring out what synthetic a priori things there are. And so this is the idea that something is known a priori, but it adds new info. And well, one of the things Kant sort of says very early on is that math falls under here. And so math is something that, so you could have never heard of the number 8, say you're a small child and you never heard of the number 8, but you've heard of both 5, 3, and you've heard of addition. So you know those things. You've never heard of the number 8 though, but you can know just by understanding these things 8. And so we get this new information out that 5 plus 3 equals 8. And yet this is something we could figure out without having ever experienced 8 before, without having experienced I mean, experiencing 8 is kind of a weird thing, and that actually gets into a lot of a lot more sort of modern philosophy about what numbers are, and uh, do do numbers exist? Uh, so that's a metaphysical idea that I'm not really going to discuss here, um, but the idea is you can go from things that you know about to something you don't know about, but you can do it without without having to experience it. Uh, but you are obtaining new information. So you obtained the information of 5 plus 3 uh, being equal to 8. So you know that this you figure out this new information, but you do it in an a priori sense. Uh, and so Kant goes, and like I said, this series is going to be about the critique of pure reason, so we'll get into a lot more uh, a priori things. But so Kant says that things like space and time and his famous categories of understanding are synthetic a priori, and this is particularly this. He spends time on these, but it's a bit shorter part of the book. This he spends a bit more time on in the book, and so those are a priori synthetic, or synthetic a priori, whichever way you want to talk about that. I want to go a little bit more into this idea of analytic, of analyticity, uh, particularly from the way it would have been sort of understood more in Kant's time rather than, I mean, this kind of stuff is based on Kant's work, and it can be drawn directly from it. But the way that analyticity, particularly in the school of rationalism, uh, what it saw analyticity and particularly analytic a priori as this sort of hierarchy of things, and so they had what they called the genus and the species. And so we'll call this the genus concept and the species concept. And so when we're talking about, like I said before, we're saying that X is P. And so we could say if we're not using X as a specific thing, as sort of specific instances, but as another concept, we could say that X is the species and P is the genus. And so what this means is that the species concept is contained under, so it's contained under the genus concept, and so this falls under the genus concept, but also the genus concept is contained within the species concept, and so the concept X up here contains P. So anything that you can say about P, you can also say about X. And so maybe you could think of that as if we have dog as our genus concept, and then maybe beagle as a type of dog. And so this is our species concept. So beagles are dogs. So this is contained under the concept of dog, but dog is contained within beagle. So beagle has dogness, I guess you could say. It contains it. It contains. So we could say that it contains dogness. It has a dogness to it. That's this concept, this genus concept of dog is contained within beagle. Then we could also we could go down and maybe say that Snoopy is an instance of a beagle, and that would be the extension of beagle. And so, but we're focusing more up here in this hierarchy of concepts, not so much in the actual extension of it. And of course, there is intension as well. So, beagle is a dog that so beagle contains everything that's in dog. So it contains all dog features, but then it also contains, say, feature A and feature B that specifically give it its beagleness in addition to its dogness. Uh, then we could also say, so if we have a genus concept A and a genus concept B, then this could have multiple species under it. So species A and species B, and then this has well, that's maybe not a good way to so we'll call it A1 and A2. And then this has species B1 and species B2. So if we want to go back to our more explicit example, so beagle would be a species under dog, but we could also put something like poodle under it. And so you can have different things falling under this genus concept. And so the idea too is that these genera, which is the plural of genus, the genera are mutually exclusive. So there is no overlap here, and also species B1 could not fall under both genus B and genus A. It has to fall under just genus B. So, for instance, poodle doesn't also fall under cat, and we don't say that. So, well, I mean, there are things, they're mammal and furry and stuff like that. So they aren't mutually exclusive, is maybe not the way to put it, but there is what are called differentia, and those are the things that define what these genera are. And so, we could say that these things both have mammal and furry, but when we are actually talking about the concept of dog and the concept of cat, we are actually we're looking at what differentiates these things from each other. So differentia, and so so maybe this has under it in its so this would be in its sort of intention. This might be has meows, and this has barks. And so those are things that differentiate these two concepts from each other. And those are the things we're interested in when we talk about the concept of cat, the concept of dog, or more generally the concept of genus A and the concept of genus B. And so these things, their intention, their intention contains their intention. And intention, once again, is a very uh, modern thing. So this is modern. This you will not find in Kant, but you could say that the intention is the differentia. So the meaning of the concept, the thing that makes genus B be genus B. Uh, that was kind of a funny sentence, but the thing that makes genus B what it is, its intention in the modern sense, is its differentia. It's the 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 things about B that make it different from all other concepts. Uh, and so, like I said, it's not we can't say mutually exclusive because we could we could say that the concept of cat contains furry, but that would also be under or that would also define part of the definition of dog, and so these are not differentia of each other. These would be things that I guess you could say make them both fall under the concept of mammal. And so you can see that there is a hierarchy where in the dog beagle part, we're saying that dog is the genus and beagle is the species, but we could also then break this up into dog and cat, in which mammal is now the genus and dog and cat are now the species. But then you could break this up into beagle and poodle and other breeds of dog. And then in this case, dog is the genus and these are the species. Uh, yeah, and so like I said, we have this hierarchy here. This could even go up further, and we could say that this is under animal, and so you can kind of keep going up and up further into more generic, which is why it's called genus or genera, because as you go up, they become more and more generic or more general, uh, and you can kind of keep going up. Uh, maybe eventually you get to a place where you're just saying things. Things are the genus and something else is the species, and you can work your way down. But anyway, I just wanted to go over a little bit more of this idea of analyticity, um, and that figures into our discussion up here of the analytic a priori. And so containment, we could see kind of that in our discussion down here. Um, and so, uh, I mean, I even use the word contained here. Uh, is that the species is contained under the genus, and the genus is contained within the concept or the species concept. So the genus dog, it's that dogness is contained within beagle, and beagle is contained under dog. Uh, and so once again, this is more grist for a lot of philosophy right here, and particularly the scholastic philosophers were very interested in this idea of do these universals, they called them, exist? So is there something, is there some dogness that sort of exists? Is this a thing that it exists in itself, this dogness? Uh, and so we're not going to get too much into that. If you're interested, people like Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus and people like that talk a lot about this idea of universals, um, and things like that. And so um, So yeah, I'm not going to get too much into that. I mean, this is still talked about today, but in sort of in different terms. Things like do abstract abstractions do abstractions exist? Do sets exist? Things like that. And things uh, like when you put a bunch of things together, so sets or maybe so if you have a collection of atoms that make up, say, a table, so I'm not good at drawing, but we'll say that this is our table here. Uh, is there some tableness that exists, or is that just so that would be nominalism, which also harkens back to these medieval, these scholastic philosophers. Uh, is there some tableness that exists, or is table just some word that we use as a shorthand for this sort of table-wise collection of atoms here? And so, yeah, like I said, that's there's entire books and papers and stuff about that kind of stuff. And so anyway, like I said, that's the idea of analyticity. To sort of uh, go further into this idea of the a priori versus a posteriori. Um, so, like I said, these are epistemological, so they have to do with how you come to know something. Epistemological. They have to do with how you come to know something. Um, and the reason I want to go into this is because a lot of times this is confused for modality, which is necessity versus contingency. Contingency, or contingency is sometimes thought of as possible. So if something is necessary, so necessary versus possible, or necessity versus contingency. And so this is what's called modal logic. Uh, and so uh, a lot of times people think that a priori means necessity and a posteriori means contingent. Um, and so I guess to pin down this necessary and contingent thing, so uh, necessity means that it's true in all possible worlds. And this once again goes beyond Kant. Um, so they back in his day they did have sort of an idea about uh, necessity and contingency. In fact, that goes all the way back to people like Aristotle. We're talking about things like that. Uh, but this idea of true in all possible worlds is a quite new idea in philosophy. And essentially, what that means is well, it means it's not contradictory. So the example used quite often would be something like a square circle. It's necessary that this doesn't exist because it's contradictory. So in all possible worlds, any any world you can possibly conceive of, square circles do not exist. Um, but there can also be things that do exist in all possible worlds, and this is often, math is often used for this. So uh, 5 plus 3 equals 8 is true in all possible worlds. It's just by definition that 5 plus 3 equals 8. And so this is said to be true in all possible worlds, where something that is contingent, uh, you can conceive that it's not necessarily true in all possible worlds. So I guess you could say that that it's possible to be different, and so that could be something like, so maybe you have a tree in your front yard. Well, you can conceive of a world where that tree is not in your front yard, or where that tree is maybe 3 feet north from where it is. And so those are possible worlds. You could say that there's a possible world where everything is exactly the same. Everything is exactly the same, except that tree is 5 feet north. And so that, there's no contradiction there. There's nothing saying that would be impossible. It's not what is called. Uh, so it is logically possible, and you'll see this term come up in a lot of modern day philosophy. This idea of something being logically possible as opposed to uh, physically possible. And so something that would be physically impossible, say, would be maybe me going outside and lifting something that weighs 100 tons. That would be physically impossible. So me lifting 100 tons is physically impossible, but it's not logically impossible. There's no contradiction there. There's no contradiction involved in that. And so we would say that it is logically possible, but physically impossible. And so logically possible is usually a bit more giving, because we can say that a lot of things that are physically impossible are still logically possible. But necessity is essentially logical possibility. Well, no, that's not true. But it is necessary for necessity, I guess you could say, to be logically possible. Uh, well, that's also true of contingent. So, uh, but uh, contingent, as I said, is possible to be different in some possible world. So there's no contradiction. There's some possible world where that is, where something. I mean, there's a possible world where I could lift 100 tons. It's not logically impossible. Uh, but anyway, getting back to this a priori and a posteriori idea. So this idea of a priori being necessary and a posteriori being contingent uh, was sort of famously debunked by Saul Kripke back in the 1970s with his book Uh, well, actually, it's some lectures he gave that have been turned into a book called Naming and Necessity. And it's a fairly short book, but it's had a huge impact on modal logic. And so uh, Kripke points out a few instances where you could have something that is is a posteriori, but also but also necessary. And he uses the example of gold has 79 protons. And so this is necessary because in order to be defined as gold, it has to have this. Gold is the element that has 79 protons. So that is necessary. If it does not have 79 protons, if it has more, then it's not gold. However, the fact that gold has 79 protons is not something that you would know a priori. Uh, the concept of 79 protons is not contained in the concept of gold in the way that uh, you would think. So you can't know about gold and you can't know about 79 protons and make the connection that these are necessary, that are together. And so this is something that gold has 79 protons, uh, is something that was found later on. I mean, people knew what gold was long before anybody knew what protons were. And so this is something discovered later on. And so it came into knowledge a posteriori, not a priori. And Kripke also gives an example for a priori. Ooh, that's not written very well. A priori, but also contingent. And so the example he used was the stick. I don't know exactly what it's made out of, but it's some object that's in Paris. It's in Paris, and it is used to define what 1 meter is. And so it's a priori because we are using this stick to define what 1 meter is. So the 1 meter is what the stick is. However, we can think of a possible world where the stick is a different length. So let's say, just to scale, that this is 1 meter in the real world. In the real world, but we could think of a possible world where 1 meter is defined to be this long. Uh, so I'll just put pos there. Or it could be 1 meter could be this long. And so we know that 1 meter is the length of this stick in Paris a priori, but it's also contingent because we can think of possible worlds where the stick is different lengths. And so this was just showing that even though it's quite common in philosophy for people to say that a priori is necessity, and that a posteriori is contingent, but that's not true. So it's kind of confusing because quite often it's very often that this is true because necessity is oftentimes uh, based on uh, the definition of something. And so, as we talked about up here, uh, so Kant used these three definitions for analytic a priori: containment, identity, and clarification. So, identity is the definition of something, and so quite often the definition of something is something that we would define or that we would say is necessary. So once again, going back to bachelors are unmarried men, and so in all possible worlds, uh, the concept of bachelor and the concept of unmarried men are necessarily together. I mean, you can think of a possible world where bachelor just means something else. The actual word, the actual sounds coming out of your mouth means something else, and therefore bachelors are not unmarried men. But we're talking about the intentionality here, the the meaning or intention uh, is the same in all possible worlds. Um, and so that's why a priori something that's like this uh, is often mistaken as necessary, where a posteriori is often mistaken as contingent because these are things that are discovered. This is knowledge that you come upon through experience, um, and so and so this is oftentimes thought to be contingent. But as we saw down here, uh, we came across the fact that gold has 79 protons by experience, but it's necessary that gold has 79 protons, or otherwise it would not be gold. Uh, and so that is um, that is the ideas that we will be talking about a lot in this series of lectures about Kant's critique of pure reason. So once again, just to make sure to clarify, this is uh, this is the stuff that we will be spending a lot of time on in this lecture series. A lot of this other stuff was just explaining it using quite often more modern ideas in philosophy, but this is sort of the thrust of the critique of pure reason, and particularly the synthetic a priori, which, as I said, comes to Kant's idea of space and time and the categories of understanding. So space and time are the a priori intuitions, and I'll get into in the next video what Kant means by intuitions, and these are a priori concepts, and that's sort of an important difference here, is the difference between intuitions and concepts. And like I said, I'll get into that more in the next video. But the takeaway message from this video is really this table here, this idea of the analytic a priori being this sort of containment or identity where we can sort of figure out without experience that two things are the same, like bachelors and unmarried men. These concepts are contained within each other, and the identity of it. So the identity of bachelor is that of unmarried men and vice versa, and clarifying. So clarifying is maybe a little bit more of the most different here, and so the clarification, I guess you could say, is like I said, if we know that A is a bachelor, and we know about the concept of unmarried men, then it's clarifying to say, oh, well, bachelors are unmarried men, and so A is A is a bachelor, and therefore A is an unmarried man. And so that's sort of the clarifying idea behind it. Whereas the synthetic a posteriori is empirical, and so those are things that we have to use experience and the senses. And as I said, we gain new information from it, and that's one of the reasons why this idea of clarifying is a little bit controversial, because it's like, what do you mean by clarifying? If we're not obtaining new information, what does that mean by clarifying? What's the difference between clarifying and obtaining new information? Uh, and that's a lot. That's some of the criticism that Kant has gotten since the Critique of Pure Reason came out. Things like, are these three definitions, are these really saying the same thing? And does this even make sense? Uh, this analyticity, as I talked about before, is a big thing in philosophy about what that means, and whether this is something that is coherent, and does this distinction even really exist? Can we say that this distinction exists? But like I said, that's all stuff that sort of came after the Critique of Pure Reason, and throughout these videos I'll touch on a little bit of that here and there, but mostly I just want to do an exposition on the Critique of Pure Reason. And I think this video, well, hopefully this video is clarifying about these concepts that are sometimes a little bit elusive, especially to people just getting into the philosophy of Kant. This analytic and synthetic distinction, this a priori and a posteriori distinction, and that kind of thing. And anyway, I'm kind of rambling now, so I will see you in the next video.